Chicago Fire by Elliot, Charlie, Josh, and Ethan.
The Chicago Fire was a devastating event that burned for 3 days from October 8th to October 10th. The fire started in a neighborhood southwest of downtown Chicago. One of the rumors was that a cow knocked down a lantern and that caused the fire to spread everywhere, but we still do not know the true cause of the fire. Since buildings used to be made of wood and streets were covered in sawdust, the Chicago Fire easily tore through and burned the city. The fire also spread quickly because of the dry and windy climates.
After the city government improved city codes and rebuilt the city, the effort to rebuild this was called the Great Rebuilding. While the rebuilding, 120 bodies were recovered, but all recovered were dead. The fire destroyed the city businesses district, but it lacked the stockyards and the new packing plants on the south side untouched, known as the hog butcher of the world. Two events stopped this phase reconstruction.
The first was the failure of a bank, J. Cook and Company, in September 1873. The bank's failure triggered a nationwide depression that halted much of the Chicago's construction. The second event was another small fire in the weeks prior, which exhausted the firefighters. This fire destroyed more than 800 buildings on over 60 acres. Terracotta emerged as a popular and effective building material.
Mid-1880s, terracotta tiling made Chicago one of the most fireproof cities in the nation. Because of terracotta tiles became roofing materials for the new Palmer House. The building itself was made of iron and brick. After the fire, the people of Chicago had to come together to rebuild, and that's what started the Great Rebuilding, and that's how the people of Chicago came together after the fire.
Thesis. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire killed more than 300 people, destroyed more than 170,000 structures, and left more than 100,000 people homeless. It remains one of the most deadly fires in American history, but it also inspired a renaissance of rebuilding, making the city safer and more organized.
Theme. Our project integrates rights and responsibilities because it will talk about the social, economic, and human rights of the people living in Chicago. The people in Chicago deserve having housing, jobs, and to be treated fairly. They deserve to live in a safe city and not to worry about becoming homeless or losing their jobs because of the fire. If they did not have a house to live in or a job to pay their bills, they would not have a good life.
The project will also talk about the legal responsibilities that the city had to the people affected by the fire, and also the social responsibilities that the citizens had to help with the fire and the damage it caused.
This includes creating a better safety system like a fire alarm because the safety system wasn't good at the time, and creating a better system can result in more people getting notified on what is happening so they can prepare on what to do to be safe. Another thing would be building the buildings with stronger material that can withstand the fire like bricks or concrete, because back then the buildings were made of wood and fire spread more rapidly on wood than it does on concrete or bricks. One more thing that they can do is to be more prepared for these types of situations. For example, build a shelter so that way people can be safe and not be revealed to the fire.
Evidence 1.
One important source to use as evidence to prove our thesis is a map of Chicago and the area that the fire attached. The Library of Congress has a map that shows the area by streets. If you look at the map, you can see that it affected a huge part of the city. It reached far north and south, and it traveled near the lake and also along the Chicago River. The 170,000 structures that it destroyed include houses and businesses where the 100,000 people lived and worked. Another map that we found that is important to have is the one that shows the time and place of the fire. It is helpful to know where it started and how it spread with the wind. I think it supports it because you can follow the route of the fire and see how far it traveled. By following the map, you can see how many miles it traveled while.
Evidence 2. Another source of evidence that we use was a letter written by someone who was there when the fire took place. This person was named John R. Chapin. He also drew pictures of what he saw. Then he sent the letter to a magazine company called Harper's Weekly. He talked about everything that he saw. He described the buildings for how big they were and the beautiful they were. He also talks about how many buildings were burnt down and how the city was ruined, showing that this was a very disastrous event.
Our topic matters because it shows the history of the city that we live in and how serious and tragic the event was. It also is important because the city was able to survive, rebuild, and become safer. We can learn from the people who were living during that time and how they were able to work together to help put out the fire and rebuild the city. Another important lesson is that the government and the people learned what they needed to do to help avoid a massive fire from happening. They learned to construct buildings made out of other materials that weren't wood. They probably also learned how they could deal with emergencies better. Right now, Los Angeles is going through many fires that also are destroying cities. This makes what happened in Chicago even more important because it teaches us that how fires can happen at any time and it does not matter how much advanced the technology is.
One more source of evidence that we use is different theories on how the fire started. One of the theories on how the fire started was that a cow knocked down a lantern and it caught on fire and it grew larger and larger. Another theory on how the fire started was that a man named Daniel Sullivan ran to a barn and saw the fire ignite. Many believe that he accidentally knocked down a lantern with his foot. One more theory on how the fire started was that another man named Lois Kahn claimed that he started the fire by into the hayloft with other boys, including Mr. O'Leary's son. It was said that one of the boys tilted the lantern, which caught on fire, and that made the barn catch fire. On this list, the most popular theory, Mrs. O'Leary and her cow named Daisy knocking down the lantern. This supports our thesis because we can figure out how the fire started and what
Conclusion.
to do to prevent the same mistake from happening again.
Our topic matters because it shows the history of the city that we live in and how serious and tragic the event was. It is also important because the city was able to survive, rebuild, and become safer.
Thank you for listening.